All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Step by Step. Today we are joined by Sam Miller. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Appreciate you having me, guys.
Yeah,
Of
of
course.
course. So we always start off with, I'm recovering from a cough, so my voice is going to be kind of scratchy today. But we always start off with one win and one opportunity that we experienced in the last week or so. So let's start with you, Sam. What do you got going on? What's one thing that you feel like you won, you did well at, and one thing that you could have done better at?
So I'd say a couple things. One, I'll start with the opportunity because that tends to be how I look at things. I'm always looking at different areas to tweak and iterate off of whether it's my current schedule or something my team is doing. So I would say an opportunity for me is I'm always kind of looking at ways to optimize different seasons of my business or scheduling. So, for example, for me, a couple things happened that partially were in my control, but partially due to other people in terms of scheduling, where definitely have an opportunity to do a better job kind of time blocking and organizing things. I'm usually someone who's pretty much a stickler for that. But I think coming out of the holidays, you know, we sometimes you can sometimes forget stuff that has worked for you in the past. So as I was moving into the new year, just remembering some of the things that work best for me from a scheduling and time management perspective, I think there's an opportunity there, as well as just kind of general flow related to my team and the people that I work with regularly. As far as wins, have had some great conversations with coaches recently, both in our community and online, and I do see a little bit of a shift in terms of awareness and even the meaning behind the work that they're doing. Had a great call on Friday with a coach who's just being like incredibly resourceful, both in terms of his own coaching career and also clients. So I'd say the win, less specific to my own life. I just feel like I've had some really great conversations lately with people in the industry, whereas maybe Q3, Q4 last year, I felt like the tone of those conversations was a little bit different. So I'd say just the people I'm talking to definitely had some better interactions recently over the past like 2 weeks or so.
Awesome.
Nice.
Awesome. Eric, what about you? You go next and then I'll go last.
Okay, yeah. So something I've noticed is so for me in the winter and the off season and post show, my schedule is my own personal schedule. I've been a freelancer, self-employed guy for like 10 years. I usually end up sleeping really late. And I'm then subsequently going to bed really late. So it's like my time will just shift later and later and later. So I'm waking up at noon, 1, 2 o'clock. Then I'm cramming in what I got to do, try to get to the gym, try to get to a gig, try to answer emails, and get all my food in. And it was really bad last year. So this year I've been making a conscious effort just to get up at a reasonable time. So having like an 8 o'clock wake up pretty consistently, having time in the morning to do things, space my meals out, do my cardio, get to work. It's been nice. And maybe that's normal for a lot of people that have like more structure and more of a life. But for me to take that extra step for that discipline, it's been nice, and it's been good for my mental health too. So that was the win. And what was the other one? Something we could do better.
Yeah.
Something we could do better. Yeah, there's always stuff we can do better. Um, I guess I've been well, you gave me a lot of material to study. You gave me some books to read, you gave me some classes to watch. It's been on my list to get on top of that. So something I could do better would be digging in some more resources.
Okay. Fair
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
Myself, a major win for me, I think, was confirmed today. I had another client who had Hashimoto's, and we have effectively, reduced her TPOAB now 3 times via testing. So it's confirming that it's trending in the right direction, both TPOAB and TGAB. So she was pretty happy about that. So we can switch over to physique goals. And I feel like Hashimoto's is one of those cases I've worked like so many times now that it's like it like the back of your hand. So it's cool to like kind of check off that box and be like, I've seen so many of these cases now. I feel very, very confident in it. So I kind of had that, feeling today, which is always a great thing, as a coach, in terms of honing your skill set. I would say an opportunity for me, and I think this is an ongoing opportunity, is to look at something on social media and not address it and not touch it. So yet again, this week, I got into it with like some person about some stupid thing that they were doing, and I just had to insert myself in the conversation. I just had to post about it on my story and cause a stir, which is kind of like my brand now, right? And it's good for business, but it is so emotionally draining. And I'm just like, why do I have to do this? But no, wait, I kind of want to do it. No, but why do I have to do this? So I'm still wrestling with finding that balance of just letting things be and not touching every goddamn piece of shit that I come across when I'm walking the road. So that's my opportunity. That's maturity. That's the quest for maturity, right?
That's
So,
good.
but
That's good. Oh, that's funny, man.
anyway, speaking of things that we want to touch and talk about, protocols. That's what we're talking about today. About the
Yes.
I guess the prevalence of them. And when we before we hit record, I was saying that protocols are a very, very beneficial and effective tool. But I think over time in our industry, it has become misused and mislabeled or vilified or glorified by both coaches and clients alike. And I guess we're just here to kind of trace back the steps as to like how it kind of came to be, because functional coaching really only blew up in like 2019, I would say. So, I mean, Sam, like,
Is it that new? 2019?
I mean, naturopathy and all that has been around for a very, very long time. I mean, going
Sure.
back to like Royal Lee of like standard process and everything. But recently in our space, I would say, would you say so, Sam? Would you agree with that
A
timeline?
couple waves. So I think they're, it's just like when a new iPhone comes out, right? You've got the early adopters and then you've got people who are kind of more towards the mainstream. So I'd say maybe a little bit prior to 2019. I think functional health and bodybuilding specific. So Jeff, obviously with your background competing and some of your clientele, and your kind of origins as where you're located in the country, I would agree that a boom definitely happened 2019, definitely 2020. 2021 was a big year as well. And I think we've continued to see growing rise and interest there,
Mm,
but also with each subsequent generation or each, with the volume of posts and information shared related to that area, I think we also sometimes get further away from that true source of what it is that we're trying to do with. I've even stopped using the word functional sometimes and stopped using the word protocol sometimes because I
yeah,
feel like people have misinterpreted it to such a degree that now I almost need to use alternate terminology to convey what it is that I believe in and what I stand
right,
for in the industry, which is, originally where we were looking at something like a quote unquote protocol. It wasn't like a cookie cutter thing. It was maybe a select assortment of different nutritional strategies or products that could be used to help someone with a given situation. But there was a little bit of adaptability to it. And I think it's kind of what we're starting to see in the functional nutrition space is actually quite similar to what we've seen in the mainstream diet space. Is like instead of adapting and adopting a nutritional style that works best for the person, their lifestyle, their training modality. So, like if they're a bodybuilder versus they are a perimenopausal woman who trains 2 days a week, there's going to be a different strategy needed there. So, we adapt the strategy to the person instead of the person to the strategy. Now, over time, that word I think became known as protocol, and we ended up trying to like fit people into protocols as opposed to adapting, adjusting, titrating, rotating, modifying protocols. And I'm putting this in air quotes if you're listening on the audio version to the people that we're working with inside our coaching practice. And so I don't even think there's like a set definition. I know Jeff and I are largely on the same page when we throw that word out there into the ether, that we sort of understand what we're talking about. But I think we're seeing an over reliance on things like set supplementation, or you need X products and you need, this exact caloric amount and food ingredients and removing certain things and or elimination diets of some kinds. Or we've seen a lot with like the rotational keto, back cycle, like all sorts of just random stuff that's kind of popped up in the industry. So I think I'd agree on the rise of the functional coaching space, functional health, functional nutrition, functional medicine, which sort of came as this second iteration to, as Jeff mentioned, naturopathic physicians or Eastern medicine, which has obviously been around for thousands of years, and even what some would consider kind of getting more to herbalism, and then blending that with maybe folks who are either Western practitioners or nutrition coaches, trainers who do take more of like a root cause approach to things. So definitely has grown in popularity. Number one. Number two, I'd say the shift that we've seen is in the way that uh, people aren't even looking to coach anymore. It's like they're just looking for a set of answers to the test, which is what they believe. They think that's what a protocol
Yes,
is,
that's a
which is
very
That's a
actually
good way to
not.
say it. Answers to the test. I like that.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
like when I think about it and I see what's going on, and I do want to kind of pause for a minute and make sure we're just all on the same page in terms of what we're observing or seeing. I think people crave a protocol because they lack the surety and confidence in their own coaching capabilities to navigate specific and individual situations. So we're looking outside of ourselves for answers as coaches and health professionals and outside of the lives of our clients instead of looking inside of them, looking inside of their world, the 360 degrees of their experience and our experience as coaches. And then a little bit of the research and evidence base. Like we could take the client's experience, our experience, and then what the research and evidence says, and we can blend a really nice approach that works best for the individual. We turn to protocols when we lack that confidence and surety in creating our own game plan, our own
right,
approach. It's like when Google Maps or Waze or Apple Maps came out, like you wanted the map because it made you more confident in the idea you perceived that it'd be a more reliable way of getting to your destination versus just kind of using a compass and like a paper map.
right.
And I think that's what people think that protocols are. However, the issue is it's not like a fixed set of roads where nothing changes and like I-95 stays in the same place. When you're working with a real human, there's some moving targets and
Right,
they have to deal with a thing called life, which means their job, their relationships, their training, injuries that pop up. There are things that change and we have to be sensitive to those individuals. So I think people, both coaches and also clients, look to protocols because they are looking outside of themselves and their coaching relationships for answers. Clients think that it's the thing that they need, the thing that they have to do. And coaches haven't acquired the skill set, the tools, and the knowledge necessary to be able to navigate those more advanced cases without them. And I think it's also because of the way that certain marketing is done in our industry. It's making people, both coaches and clients, feel very broken to where they need this thing that they have to go buy or go do, and that is
absolutely.
going to be the solution. That is going to be the answer to what they're experiencing. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case. I know, Jeff, you and I have kind of gone back and forth on that a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, Sam, you bring up a lot of great points here. And like, one thing you said was like the industry has become like fitting the client into the protocol, not the other way, and not considering the thing called life. And I don't know if like you guys see this or agree with this. Because Sam, where are you located, by the way, geographically?
So I'm on the East Coast. I'm in the Carolinas.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm gonna use that as a talking point next. But I think it's ironic in the sense that a lot of clients who come to coaches for functional health issues, they do so because their doctors have failed them, or that they're rushed out of the hospital room or the doctor's office with just a prescription, yet another prescription for a birth control or an antidepressant or a weight loss drug or whatever. So they don't trust doctors. But it's almost like some coaches are doing the same thing.
They're doing the same thing, but with herbal products. It's
But with
like
herbal
you
products,
you
the
you hate
discount
on.
code.
Exactly. They like position Western medicine as the enemy to then fight that battle only to do the same thing. But instead of a controlled
Right,
substance or a script, we're replacing it with supplements. And Jeff, you've hit on this in terms of bioidentical hormone replacement. I'm situationally pro HRT when someone needs it.
me
I think
too.
situational is an important
Yeah.
caveat to add there.
Yeah,
But we've essentially gone from, okay, the reason people were frustrated with Western medicine is it's a band-aid solution. And we're obviously, in some cases, there's an oversight of maybe not getting to the root cause of why something's going on. So for example, had a conversation recently, perfect case to outline why there might be some frustration, and rightfully so, with Western medicine. Person had, so this was postpartum case, thyroid, potential risk for Hashimoto's based on antibiotic use, C-section, due to IVF pre-pregnancy, going to super physiological hormone levels during pregnancy and then coming down, bottoming off of that, potential risk for postpartum depression, mood changes, quality of life issues, so on and so forth. So it's very easy from a Western medicine perspective to jump in, okay, antibiotics, SSRIs, thyroid meds, the list goes on, right? And so that person wasn't necessarily educated on, okay, here are your options. Here's how your lifestyle plays into this, your nutritional choices, your gut microbiome, the gut immune connection, and all of these things. So we get frustrated when, pills are prescribed in that direction as like kind of this, okay, but this is going to make you feel better right away.
Right.
And what's happened is now coaches are basically doing the same thing, but with protocols pretty much, or with a specific stack of supplements and marketing it as if, okay, well, no, you don't want to take prescriptions for the rest of your life, but you're going to take these 15 things instead that actually cost more. And
Right.
I think that's where my frustration is because we're losing sight of lifestyle medicine and basic tools that everybody needs to do. I'm not anti, I have supplements down. I'm in my office upstairs. I have supplements downstairs. I really care about nutrition. I think supplements are cool as well, but we're not trying to replace the cornerstone considerations in someone's health journey with just a bunch of like throwing a bunch of products at them sometimes when they're not even ready for those things and being consistent with other items. So that's kind of where I stand on that. And Jeff, I totally see exactly what you're talking about, which is
Yeah.
we demonize Western medicine as an industry in terms of health, fitness, nutrition professionals. But then there's a subset of our industry that's repeating the exact behavior, but acting as if,
Just with
they're like,
supplements.
I didn't do anything. Yeah, but it's with supplements.
Now, Sam and Eric too. Like, have you guys noticed that? Here's one thing that and this might be like my own perspective or whatever, my own opinion or whatever, right? But like Eric and I, like we live in Massachusetts. Like Eric is like pretty much outside of Boston
Yep.
in a suburb called Brighton, right?
Yep.
So I'm about 45 minutes west of Boston. In Massachusetts, we have some of the best medical care in the world. In the world. Like we have Tufts, we have Harvard, we have MIT, we have all these Brigham and Women's, children's, whatever. Like we have all these great hospitals and great doctors and great education. I feel like the perception or the respect towards quote unquote Western medicine is a lot different where Eric and I are located or how we've been brought up to perceive it versus someone in Ohio or Kentucky or Tennessee or Texas. I don't know if you are seeing this as well, Sam, but I keep track of like the geographical location of like a lot of my clients. And I would say the majority of my clients who seem to take a high interest in these standalone clinics and the naturopathy and all that are usually in the Midwest. Do you see that as well?
I would say there's definitely some folks in the industry who are anti-Western medicine who may be located in those areas. As far
Yeah.
as my experience, so I was born, so just context, I was born in New York. My undergraduate and graduate education were in North Carolina. I've spent time on both the East and West Coast. I have friends and family in both areas, spent a lot of time just due to family, significant others, spent a good amount of time in Western states, Arizona, California, Utah, Vegas, things like that. So I do think that the functional nutrition, functional medicine, naturopathy, also popular on the West Coast because there are universities such as
Yeah.
there are a lot of naturopathic doctorate programs that are on the West Coast. And I've also had some good friends who've gone through programs like that where I think that does impact the local communities. But I would agree that if you're near a prestigious university or someone with a higher level education, or you can walk down the street to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, then yeah, that may impact your perception of Western care. But that's why it's important to understand there are good doctors and there are not so good doctors. There are good coaches and not so good coaches. And the issue is we're looking at this as like a binary black or white thing. You could go and have a great relationship with your physician and they could be very open-minded to things. I learned a lot about endocrinology from an endocrinologist who was Western trained, right? I've even mentored with people who are obese or, and I've also had folks who worked in a conventional Western medicine setting, maybe had a DO training as a background, and they left that because they wanted to start their own private practice, moved
Right.
out into Montana in the middle of nowhere, and kind of just wanted to do their own thing and leave that. So I've had the benefit of seeing both perspectives, both, that endocrinologist I referenced went on to teach at NYU, which is, a pretty higher level academic institution despite a lot of like modern controversy and everything. They've historically had some pretty good academic programs. So when I look at what you're saying geographically, it is true, but I think part of it is where are the educational hubs for things like naturopathic doctorate degrees, maybe a master's of science in clinical nutrition of some kind, maybe more functional programs in a way. There are some masters leaning that way. I still think those kind of lag behind a little bit. But
Yeah.
there are personalities too, where if you look at who they've worked with, either in the bodybuilding space or coaches that have influenced them, people that they've been associated with, there tends to be a tendency. It's a degree of exposure question. And yes, I would say being far away from like higher respected Western medicine institutions or educational programs may play into that. I don't know if it's cause and effect though, but there's definitely a strong relationship.
Yeah.
I like what you said about good and bad. There's good and bad everything, right? Good and bad electricians, good and bad mechanics, and good and bad doctors. And just because we are on the East Coast and there is a majority of good doctors and respected medical establishments, man, I've had primary care physicians refuse to run blood work on me,
right?
Because you don't have any symptoms. Why would we run blood work? And then I raise hell and get a different doctor and I tell them that story. They go, "Oh, well, that's stupid. Let's run your labs." Right. And it's like the same
that's
hospital.
Perfect. I mean, that's a perfect example,
doctor,
man, right? Because, and you could also go to someone who maybe they're fantastic at pre-diabetes and metabolic syndrome, but maybe they're even within, let's use endocrinology as an example. You could have someone who's great when it comes to certain hormones, and they may know nothing about reproductive hormones and bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. You could have someone who is actually pretty good from a reproductive hormone perspective and have very limited application when it comes to thyroid or insulin resistance. So the original goal of why a lot of the more functional way of thinking came about is understanding how these full body systems integrate together. They connect together. They are not to be studied in silos, but rather applied and understanding how they work together. And when certain elements of that system are compromised or in a place of suboptimal function, it does impact the client, or in this case, in Western medicine, the patient, in a lot of different avenues in terms of their quality of life and the symptoms and biofeedback that they may be experiencing. So I think we forget, Western medicine, they don't get a lot of nutrition education, which probably plays into, I think, why a lot of nutrition coaches are frustrated with Western medicine doctors. They probably shouldn't be giving a ton of like dietary advice, right? Because they don't have a lot of training in it. But there's also a need to understand that based on how that educational system works, they may be very specialized in a certain thing, which is great if you need like cardiovascular surgery or you need brain surgery. It's probably not perfect for something that's maybe more suited for a lifestyle coaching and nutrition coaching, relationship. So that's also how I look at it too, is the level of specificity. If you were in a accident of some kind, or you need a procedure of some kind, you would want Western medicine. You would want someone who has that special, like very, very, very like narrow window of practice. But that's not how it works with coaching, is because we're involved in clients' lives from more of like a 24/7 perspective, not always in terms of communication, but the ramifications of their life lead into their ability to execute things related to training and nutrition.
That's making me think more like trying to treat, causes rather than cover up symptoms.
Exactly. Yeah. So I definitely think, when we would probably all agree too, there's frustrations when clients can't get labs. There's frustrations when different issues are overlooked and someone has, maybe suboptimal values or something like that. And it's showing up in their ability to achieve their ideal body composition or training performance. I mean, I've even had stages of my life, like after my head injury, where I didn't have great values from either a Western or functional perspective. But if I would have just stayed with a primary care physician, it would have been, "Oh, well, you're in range." Well, it's like, dude, you're in the bottom of the range, like barely scraping by. Or maybe someone who doesn't have great like thyroid conversion or something. There's a lot of different examples we could look at. Or maybe your insulin's like top end of the Western range. Well, it's based on a lot of unhealthy people. So I think context is really important. And I also think there is a balance between embracing. I do think coaches, and I posted about this the other day, and maybe this is an area we can take the conversation just so we're not harping on the Western medicine thing. I do think coaches need to learn physiology. I do think they should understand how the body responds to nutrition and training stimulus, how it adapts, and the impact from a hormonal perspective, from a gut health perspective, because all coaches make changes to training and nutrition, but maybe 10% of the 100% understand physiologically what's going on underneath the hood as a result of that stimulus. So I think the bigger issue is we need to learn physiology. And when we don't, that's also where we're clinging to things like protocols, or we are, um, we get frustrated. It makes us more tempted to reach towards the Western medicine solution because we're not understanding what's going on from an underlying perspective.
Now, that's a good that's a good segue into what I want to talk about next. And excuse me, my voice is acting up, but I kind of want to separate the conversation into two branches. And you mentioned coaches, so we'll go with the coaches first, and then we'll talk about the clients. Like, what are the problems? What are we seeing? What are the types of coaches and clients that kind of gravitate towards this, screw it up, or do it right? So, Sam, like you and I both, we teach, right? Like I have my classes I've been selling now for 4 years now. And you have your metabolism school, and we both deep dive into the science and the whys and the hows behind how the engine works. Now, to play devil's advocate here, do you think that the general population or our consumer base that gravitates towards our education has become too education focused and not enough application focused? Because when you're scrolling through Instagram these days versus like 5-10 years ago in the fitness space, I think someone from 10 years ago would be like, what is this? Like, is everyone a doctor now? Like, everyone's posting about T4 to T3 conversion and RT3 and TSH, or checking this and checking that. And there's not, I feel like no matter how many classes that you take or how many certifications you get, there's always so much more that you can learn. You might as well go to med school, and then after that, go to pharmacy school. Like there's where's the end point in terms of knowing enough and getting ready to apply and focusing more on the application?
As a client or a coach?
No, as a
starting
coach.
with coaches.
As a coach.
Yeah, so starting with coaches, and this is a conversation my team has a lot. And so one of my team members is in Costa Rica for 2 weeks. So I've been having a lot more of these conversations lately than even more so than I normally do. And I had 2 ladies last week where they each had like gone through 5 certifications prior to talking to me. And I do think it's because they're not actually bridging that gap between education and application, which is one of the reasons that my program has successfully existed for a long time, is because we are one of the few programs to do that through actual case studies, live community, live support, live Zooms, and actually sticking with it for a long enough time where it's not, as much as I think people do need to take classes and learn about things like gut health, or learn about different hormones or how that impacts you both, metabolically or otherwise. I think it needs to be taught synergistically and then applied to real-time client cases, and then sort of have that over the shoulder approach to it. So more like, Jeff, you do more ongoing stuff too. I think the ongoing stuff tends to create better coaches than the people who do the one-off thing all the time. You probably see that, right? It's like you have people who build a relationship with you, they work with you for a while, and they're better off than the person who went to like 3 classes and they think they're an expert on things because they went to like a thyroid class, a gut health class, and a women's health or PCOS class. That's the problem that I see, right? Is people go get their baseline certifications. I have nothing against any of those. You need like a level 1 to get in the door to do something. Like you need to learn some basics of training and nutrition. As of right now, other than my free content, I'm not necessarily everybody's person for that. So get your foot in the door. But then the problem is people they think because they went to like 1 weekend seminar or 1 3-hour Zoom call that they're now like a gut health expert or a PCOS expert. And that's not really how it works.
Yeah.
So I do think ongoing mentorship where you bridge the education and application gap and actually start to integrate those concepts into coaching is where we see the most successful outcomes. I know, Jeff, you're being a little sarcastic when you're like, go to med school, go to pharmacy school, get all the certifications and do these things. And like, you're never done with education and you're 72 years old and still not retired. So I do see a little bit of a problem around that, but I think it's because coaches try to take shortcuts. So they think like, oh, I'm going to do this. And then this is like less expensive over here. I'm going to do that, or I'm going to do XYZ influencers, gut reset thing. And then I'm going to do this person's thing because I really like their stuff and they've got supplements that I want to use. I'm going to do that. And then I want to learn about this testing thing. So this person has a thing on the Dutch test. and then they just round and round and round they go. And then they look up and all of a sudden you've spent like 5 figures and you're still not fully confident in what it is that you're doing. So I don't necessarily have an issue. I'm glad that these discussions are happening online and that
Yeah.
information is available. Because when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and coming up in the industry, the prevalence of information would have accelerated my development because I had to go to like the far ends of, we didn't even, I didn't even have my fitness pal. We're using like FitDay PC, or you got a random textbook, or you're emailing like Word documents with your coach. There's no advanced software, Google Sheet, like type, none of the stuff that's being used today. Like we're not on Zoom calls or anything like that. So I do have an appreciation for the availability of information, but I think with that, I agree with you, Jeff. Coaches don't know how to apply the information, which is a
Right.
problem, which is where they need support, and they need tools more so than protocols, in actually like how to apply
Yeah.
that science into a real life human being and like get them to actually stick. So that would be one thing. The second thing is in terms of what you're saying with everybody sharing it online. Um, I think we have to remember, because of who we follow, the content we post, the content we engage on, and the people that we're friends with, we have like this echo chamber bubble of content where we think that it seems like a lot more than it is, because there's thousands of people that we follow and interact with who maybe share similar stuff. But in the grand scheme of things, there's still millions of people who need help and probably are not educated around the concepts that are being discussed. So I see it as a blended issue. It's a little multifaceted. One, we have kind of this online fitness bubble echo chamber, which can be detrimental in many ways. And I do think we have a bit more education over application, which is a problem. And then again, we have people who think I can make more money using these protocols, putting them over people, not building client relationship. If it fails to understand how business actually works and how client retention actually works. And I've unfortunately crossed paths with people who are, they did that first and now they're paying the price, and they have to
Yeah.
live with the consequence of how they operated their business for 12 to 15 months, when for the 3 to 6 months out of the gate, it seemed like the easier path. But now
Yeah.
it's way harder to rebuild a reputation. It's way
The
harder
damage
to
control.
regain clients that you lost versus retaining clients that you already have. So I think those are like my three big things if I had to take a
Yeah.
highlighter and organize it.
Sam, you said something really profound where you said, like, in your program, you focus on the application side. And I think that's what is missing in a lot of these programs. And that's what fuels the imposter syndrome, which is then justified by always be a student. I'm going to keep spending money, because they never get enough education and application to feel like they're ready. So they're always wanting more. It's kind of like having a nutrient deficient diet, and you keep binging and you keep eating and eating, and you're never full. You're never satisfied with yourself. You always feel like you're an imposter. So you perpetuate this, right? And application is so important, because that's why in medical school they have clinical rotations, they have residency, they
Yeah,
have
I actually
doctors.
originally called the live version. So I used to do an applied science methods mentorship. And then if you stayed on, I used to actually call it a like coaching residency,
Yeah,
because I thought it was that important. And
yeah,
we've rebranded and we changed things in like 2019. So now you guys may know it as the Nutrition and Metabolism Specialization Program. But,
right.
and I have the word functional in there, but day by day, as it goes by, people like stab me in the heart to where I'm like, I feel like I got to change that first letter of the acronym. So I agree with you in a lot of ways around the application conversation, the imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
But I think people just have a different viewpoint on client retention and relationships. I want someone to stay with me because they feel supported. They feel like they can learn something new. They can have open
right.
dialogue. They can bring me different challenges that they're facing. I can give them an alternative perspective. It's not that I'm withholding secrets, right? I think a lot of people go into certain programs that are out there in the industry without naming names. And there's like hey, I got to go find this golden ticket or the solution. There's this one thing that's going to open the doors for me. And all of a sudden, I'm going to be this coach making multiple six figures, and I can charge all this, and I'm going to do all this testing, and I have access to these supplements, and I make money on that too. And it fails to account for the way that building those relationships in your business work. So from a education program to coach perspective, what's happening is, as you said, when you continue to have imposter syndrome, you're going to continue to buy stuff. And again, it's also because you don't realize that the answers lie within the lives of your clients and within your skill set as a coach. So
Mm.
I'm big on developing skills, character traits, critical
Yes.
thinking abilities
Yes.
versus there is only one way to do things. I don't agree with that. I think depending on the client, there may be a couple different ways you could do things, and you being open-minded would take you way further down the path of being a good coach than
So
someone who's like,
if
this
I
is the
can
only way to run
interject
it.
for 1 second, I love
Sure.
everything you guys are saying. It's like I feel like I would say it as like there's a difference between taking a class and taking that information and regurgitating it and having a general interest, like a genuine deep want to understand what you're learning and then how to apply it. Right? Like you can have all the certifications, regurgitate all the info, take the tests, whatever. Then you have a person in front of you, like you're saying, and how do you apply it, but how do you deal with the variables, because there's going to be variables with everybody. And if you have your list of notes that says okay, to treat this thing it's this list of stuff, but you can't adapt any of that, it's like what's the point, and an example of that could be I think this is good. So like years ago I was in a band, right, and we'd take breaks and they'd watch these videos on YouTube. They were like these history lessons in like 5 minutes, and it was like almost like it was two speed. The guy'd be like, in 1876 this happened, and then and then that happened, and then and I was like, guys, this is so stupid. This is like a waste of time. Like you're just blowing time out the window for no reason. And they're like, no, it's cool. Like, and then I was like, okay, we just watched the thing. Tell me one thing you remember from that. You know, and they couldn't tell me anything. So if you apply that to what we're talking about, class after class after class after class, okay, tell me about this one thing. Oh, I don't know. Right? Is that making sense?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
regurgitation to
Yeah.
application is a hard transition. And I think part of it, I like, so there's a couple of things you mentioned there that I'm going to parse out just for like
Yeah.
reflective listening purposes. I heard you talk about intellectual curiosity, like genuinely being interested in the topic that
Yeah. As
is
opposed to just, oh, this could be good for my business and I could
correct.
be
And
a
I
top
think
level
that's
coach. And
very important. And people who have had problems themselves or within their family or someone they deeply care about, you come at it from a different perspective because you realize what it's like to be the complex case or the client that, gets told X whatever things by however many fitness coaches. So I think having a sensitivity and intellectual curiosity is important. The regurgitation issue, I do see that. I will say I used to see more of that, Eric, in like weekend seminars where people would go and they leave with more questions than answers, but then they don't have ongoing support from a coach or mentor, which is where I think building, like having a bit of time within whatever container. If you want to go do classes, that's fine. You just need to be able to actually interact with an instructor of some kind and a community of other coaches to bounce ideas off of, right? I think
cool, yeah.
self-study, and I'm very pro self-education. I think you should read. I think you should listen to things, but I also think you should interact with other coaches and professionals. And I do think I believe in mentorship, whether it's coaching or if you're interested in, if you're like a very spiritual person and you seek mentorship or advice or wisdom from someone in your life in that capacity, great. Finances, maybe you have a advisor or a mentor. Essentially you have like a consultant, a coach, someone who's like a third party. It's really just about creating kind of a board of advisors or sounding board for your life. But with your professional development, it's really important for your career. And that's where some of this has gotten lost. Like we either have coaches who look to like a piece of paper as, instead of viewing it as an entry point into the industry, they're looking at it as a finish line of like, well, I have this now and now I'm good to go. And so I can do all these things and I can charge X amount of money, and they're kind of doing it for the wrong reason. So that's one thing. I think that's where regurgitation happens, is people who just kind of go for, they view it instead of as an entry point into continuing to cultivate expertise. They just view it as kind of like a pass go collect $200 like around the Monopoly board
well said, yeah.
kind of game. That's
Yeah.
one way that I view it. And then
I
the
think
regurgitation.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the regurgitation just creates overwhelm for clients, because if you actually have mastery over something, you can simplify it. So the longer I've been in the industry, the more I try to simplify concepts.
Yes.
And usually when people are creating big terms, I think you need, every now and then it's fine to show a little bit of expertise and authority. And if I need to go break down deiodinase enzymes and thyroid conversion, like I'll do it with you on Zoom. But I think sometimes that comes from a place of ego. And I think it was, I don't know, Jeff, you may actually have better recollection of this quote because I know you read stuff and you follow stuff online as well. But when you actually do have a level of understanding of something, you should be able to simplify it and make it kind of dumb it down a little bit, right? Versus
Right.
making it way
Absolutely.
more complex. And I think people are relying on the complexity and the lack of understanding and the regurgitation as a way to, when people are afraid of having a problem, when they don't know that the answers are within themselves and within their own
Right.
life and within a program that is quite accessible to them, they, the reason in the short term, acutely, that this works from a business perspective is people are afraid or confused or reactive, and they will buy something as a temporary solution from that place of reactivity. And the
Right.
bad thing is that's a really bad state of consciousness for a consumer because it's a high likelihood of refunds. It's a high likelihood of a very unhappy client. It's someone who's maybe not that happy with themselves or their life. It's also someone who has very high expectations, and you create essentially this dynamic where the client is feeling a level of brokenness and they're a victim and they're afraid. And then you have someone who's positioned as essentially a savior to come in and to basically fix all the problems, which does not create long-term autonomy for a client. So in terms of basic health behavior change, psychology, motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral therapy, any area of, if you look at mental health, we don't, again, this kind of comes back to looking within ourselves versus outside of ourselves for answers. When we put someone else kind of on that pedestal, that's make them responsible for our own healing, that person, that client is now going to continuously need a coach over the long haul. My goal is I'd rather, cool, if I could be your last coach, that's cool. But if you retain me, it's because maybe you enjoy my programming or you like the relationship or you like the accountability that I provide you. I don't want you to need me out of fear that you're inadequate without the coaching.
Yeah.
I don't, that's
Right.
not a great energy as far as the dynamic goes, the power dynamic from like a business perspective. So that's what I'm always very wary of. And I think more people, especially when it comes to functional health, integrative health, functional nutrition, whatever it is related to this conversation we're having and things related to protocols. That is something I'm seeing that is completely going over, I'd say like 98% of people. It's just like completely going over their heads and it's terrifying to watch.
I
Yeah.
think one of the worst things that goes on and still goes on in our industry is the exploitation of the fear and anxiety and the suffering that our clients go through. And also, the people who do sell courses and things like that, the exploitation of the insecurities of coaches. And on the flip side of things, the greed and the focus on money making that some coaches do have, that also does a disservice to the industry as well. And to sort of wrap up like at least the coaching side of things or the perspective or where you find your balance, I guess, in all of this, the way I think of it is like, it's like, how deeply do you need to know how smoking causes lung cancer and explain the science behind that to get a patient or a client to stop smoking? Like, we know that education alone isn't enough to stop people from doing bad things. Like, you can tell an alcoholic to the heavens that drinking is bad for you. It'll do this, this, and this, but they'll still drink. So education clearly is not the solution. So what is that, right? It's working the skill sets, the mental and emotional pieces, right? That's why there's AA. That's why there's counseling. Um,
I
and
do
then
think
another
education is a
example, and
first, it's kind of like that initial step in awareness, Jeff.
yeah,
So I don't want to discount education because if someone, I also think it depends on the stage of their life. So if someone realizes that alcoholism is maybe impacting someone that's very important to them, like a child or something else, and maybe they have a reason to change, I think, again, I agree with you. There are other techniques and tools and components of coaching and behavior change that are part of the conversation, 100%.
right,
But I think some coaches don't give enough of the why behind things. There's a fine line, right? You need to provide education and you need to give a little bit of, I'm not a big like one line answer guy, as you guys have probably gathered 45
yeah,
plus minutes into this podcast, but the one line answer of change this, or it's like, hey, add 15 carb, subtract 5 fat, add 10 minutes cardio, right? And that's
right,
like the whole, it's like the email. Um, there's no, so I think education gets us to a place where we understand a little bit why behind the why behind what we're doing. Some clients, you could tell them what time it is, but they appreciate knowing how the clock works. Now, does that mean that you need to go into like a deep engineering exercise of like how clocks are manufactured? No. But do you
Right.
maybe need to give them the context that, hey, there's 24 hours in the day, there's military time, and then, there's, we also have time that's not on military time. And so we track with AM and PM. And this is basically the clock, and this is how it works. And right now, Jeff and I are recording a podcast at 4:48 p.m. Eastern time on a Tuesday. That's not overwhelming, but you gave them context to understand the piece of information you were delivering, which was, hey, this is what time it is. And then you say, okay, this is how a day works, and this is how we tell time.
Yeah.
That in and of itself helps create sometimes greater adoption of the program that you create, because they
Mm.
just want to know that you're not like totally full of crap and you have their best interests in mind. But I agree with Jeff in that going into like oxidative stress for a smoker and depletion of like key nutrients and some of
Yeah.
the blood work implications, like you should know that as a coach to be able to understand the physiological ramifications of the behavior that they're engaged in.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that's going to be the number one reason why someone decides to quit smoking.
Right. I think, like, for example, like if someone tells you that they have celiac disease, you need to know you shouldn't be encouraging them to, you shouldn't be putting gluten in their diet. Or if
Correct.
someone's lactose intolerant, you should know that lactose is a sugar that's found in dairy and you don't put dairy in the diet. I think it's like knowing enough that you don't come across as dogmatic, and knowing enough that you come across as collaborative and open-minded to discussion within the prescriptions. Like, I always believe that coaching is a support role, not a dictatorship role. So I think that's the line, and everyone kind of has to find that mix, that perfect mixture of knowledge to help them feel secure to operate within that framework, I think.
I think
Um,
we kind of touched on for a second introspection. How do you get the client, if they're not an introspective kind of person, to look deep in themselves and find their own why? Like, why are you doing or not doing this thing? And I
yeah,
think that ties in also with what Sam said. You said it really well, the that almost that power dynamic of how like the coach can be this savior and the client can be this victim, and maybe within that, like, they don't want to let you down, but this is for you, not for me,
Yeah, it's
sort of
like you
thing,
should want to not let yourself down first and
yeah,
foremost, and then also me. And Jeff, I think it's like a support leadership hybrid. So I agree that
yeah,
coaching shouldn't be a dictatorship, but until the person begins to keep promises to themselves and has a level of personal accountability and integrity with their health journey of like, hey, I said I was going to go for a walk, I went for a walk. Hey, I said I was going to eat this nutritional, this was my strategy. This is what I have planned for dinner, and I followed through on that. Until we're achieving that level of follow through, I do think support is accurate, and we do need to provide a little bit of direction and affirmation.
mm,
100%. There's a guidance component to it. But I also think in people who are struggling to lead themselves, sometimes we do need to take that leadership role. But I agree, it's not like this authoritarian dictator, do as I say, type feel. Like that's not how coaching should work. But there is a level of leadership and direction required, I think, especially for people who are really uh, further away from the best version of themselves, I guess is the most polite way I can kind of put that.
I agree. Now talking about the clients, we covered like the industry in general, sort of like, the attraction to protocols, why, Western versus Eastern medicine, all that stuff, and the coaching side. Now I want to wrap things up here and use the remaining time to talk about the client side, because obviously I feel like there's a type of client that immediately gravitates towards this type of marketing message. It immediately gets duped into paying, $3,000 a month for some high ticket, I'll fix you, nobody else can type of program. Like, in the like the roster that I've worked over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years, I would say that there has not been a single client who has a functional health issue that also did not have some sort of emotional, mental, or traumatic issue happen in their lives. Like, I can count on one hand the number of clients I've worked that had primary hormonal issues, like primary hypothalamic
Yeah.
amenorrhea or primary adrenal insufficiency. It's always some sort of trigger point that happened somewhere in life, or they tried to self-medicate, or they went to some clinic or some chiropractor that put them on T3 at a really high dose, and then they developed adrenal dysfunction afterwards, and then the whole chain just got all awry
Yeah.
afterwards. What do you think?
I'd say, I definitely see that. And I want to acknowledge your experience there because I do see a lot of cases where there's some, whether it be childhood experiences, adult experiences, loss of loved ones, family members, stressful events.
Hmm.
So if you were to look at uh, in like a psychology journal, there's like a perceived stress questionnaire and traumatic life events, and they kind of rate things on a scale. Like a divorce would be like a very serious event for someone. Having an abusive relationship with a parent growing up would be a pretty severe thing for someone as well. And obviously, everyone has their own experience and it impacts them differently as an adult. But I'd say it's a mix of people who have not, because if we're really honest, right, like we all, I think honestly, most adults have something that they've experienced in their life that weighs on them mentally and emotionally. Now, are there varying degrees of that and how that impacts your physiology? 100%.
Right.
But I don't think we're in this perfect vacuum where it's like some people don't have mental and emotional health challenges. And
Good point.
I think people can paint like a rosy picture of like, hey, life is grand. But I think we all deal with some shit at some point just for lack of like, now that may look different. Maybe for someone, it's like a really difficult, maybe toxic relationship. For someone else, maybe it's a very unhealthy relationship with a parent. Maybe it's having to be the primary caregiver at a young age for your grandparent and stepping into a role that you never thought you would have to, and you weren't able to prioritize your own self-care. Maybe it was losing a friend unexpectedly early in life when you're in your 20s and you think you have your whole life out in front of you, right? We don't all have the same experiences, but I think we all, part of the human experiences, we do have challenging experiences and emotionally and mentally demanding experiences that impact us both from a psychological perspective as well as from a physiological perspective in terms of our hormones, our gut, our immune system. And so I don't want to discount that. And many of the functional health issues that we do see, people do have uh, a lifestyle and psychological factor that is playing into it. But I also think some of these same people 5, 10 years ago were the ones who were jumping on restrictive diets, jumping on aggressive training modalities that were maybe misaligned with their goals. There are some cases where a mismatched stimulus of training and nutrition and not a severe like mental health concern was the origin point. Now, why they chose that more severe training and nutrition intervention is kind of like up for debate. That would be up for a question. Was it because of their mental and emotional health? Possibly. Were they filling a void? Possibly. But there are people where the issues, the metabolic and hormonal adaptations seem to stem from a training approach or nutrition approach gone wrong or a history of competing or something. Now, maybe they were competing because they were trying to, because of their ego or filling a void or trying to feel better about themselves and their self-esteem. So I agree with you, Jeff, that some of those issues, that's the case. And I've had maybe like an endometriosis or PCOS case where seeing a family member, held at gunpoint, like very, very stressful experience going to impact you at a very young age. People who were, we see some physiological issues where maybe it's like post-birth control and the reproductive axis has to kind of kick back on after pharmacological suppression. And maybe there weren't really severe mental health challenges. So I would say it's a blend. Sometimes if I had to categorize, Jeff, I think there's the cases you mentioned, and we also have to be mindful in our marketing. And I think when you were um, maybe in a slightly different place in your career, you might have attracted those clients a little bit more based on the content that was being put out or things that you talked about in your classes. And maybe you were coming into a level of awareness in your own journey as a professional. And now and you see that and you keep an eye out on that. And it's kind of a red flag for you. But if I were to divide it, I would say there's folks with previous um, past stressors or life events that were led to a domino or cascade and kind of this downward spiral of health. That would be one. Number two would be pharmacological suppression, whether that be birth
Yes.
control or PED use. So for like guys, like maybe low T as a result of PEDs, or but like post birth control for women. There's obviously other medications that can impact our endocrine system. That would be another one. Third would be someone who was falsely educated or miseducated on training and nutrition and maybe was over exercising, under eating, and that led to some metabolic and hormonal adaptations as well. I think within those camps, though, Jeff is correct in that some of the three or four things that I outlined, there's a percentage in each one of those groups that the reason they did the thing, like the reason they took the PEDs or hormones, or the reason they competed, or the reason they did the aggressive diet, was because of a personal issue or lack of fulfillment or lack of happiness in their own life. And so they were looking for this thing that was going to make them feel better, or this pursuit, like a competition, or, whether it was CrossFit, bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongmen or strongwomen competition. So there's a lot of ways I think it can unfold. And so I look at it kind of multifaceted, and I think there's varying
Yes.
degrees to those experiences, like the being held at gunpoint example. Yeah, that's really intense, right? For any human being. But also it's intense to be a caregiver for a grandparent and being thrust into this like massive role of responsibility and emotion for clients too. So I try to not like categorize it or rate it in terms of the intensity of their experience, and just kind of have respect for like, hey, these people have been through a lot and it may impact them on a physiological level. I think having respect for that. And then also realizing like, I was misguided by some magazines growing up. I thought like, hey, this is what you're supposed to eat and this is how you're supposed to lift. And
Yeah.
if you do that as a natural guy, and you're reading like Flex magazine and you see Kai Green, like, sorry, dude, that's probably not going to work for you. So there's some naivete as well. Like, I think there's some people who are a little naive and maybe need some education, and they need a coach or a mentor to really
Yeah.
educate them on the right way to do things that appropriately fueling their body. So I'd say it's a blend. I've seen all of those cases, and I think they all can be handled a little bit differently, just depending on the person's background and their health history.
I would say, and this is how I teach, coaches I mentor, and this could be helpful for anyone listening, but I feel like there has to be some sort of genetic or, underlying disease, like you're susceptible to XYZ illness or condition genetically, right? Then there has to be some sort of a physiological or a psychological or emotional trigger, which then causes the person or the client or the patient to commit some degree of user error on their bodies. So an example of this would be a girl who has a genetic history of autoimmune disease. So let's say she is prone to Hashimoto's or Crohn's. She breaks up with a long-term boyfriend or has an abusive relationship, dives into 5 years of back-to-back contest preps and PED use, and then decides that she wants to stop bodybuilding. And now she is left with hormonal issues and a whole bunch of metabolic dysfunctions. And that is the client that comes to us as the functional case across our desk. I
Yeah,
think
in many
that would be
cases that is a very real example. And the reason I was kind of smiling is not, I mean, obviously that's a challenging situation. And if you were the person in that story, it feels very real and very intense for you.
right.
But as coaches, we see patterns. And so for me, I was kind of smiling with Jeff's example, because that's a very real case and a
Yeah.
very real possibility. And we see that all the time. Now, whether it's Hashimoto's or a cascade of metabolic adaptation and gut dysfunction and motility related issues and challenges, maybe they don't have the autoimmune predisposition, but they end up with a host of I think, Jeff, you and I have talked about this before. I kind of call it like the perfect storm client case of how things play out. We've had a conversation on how chronic dieting and stress and low stomach acid, micronutrient depletion, all those things kind of create this vicious cycle for a client. So I would agree that there are some underlying risk factors, but the biggest issue I think I'm trying to tackle, and this is why I went pretty simple with even the explanations in my content, my book, podcast, et cetera. And definitely talk about more advanced material inside my program in more of a mentorship capacity. But I really have been trying to zero in on like the lifestyle medicine component
Yeah.
and movement and nutrition. And then also, yes, can we use some of these tools from like a functional medicine or functional health space, of whether it's testing or whether it's supplementation? Can you include that yes, you can. But if our lifestyle is not in a solid place, if we are doing it for the wrong reasons and we don't also understand what we're doing or why we're doing it, or we're doing it out of a state of fear, or out of a state of brokenness, I don't I don't think that's the solution, right? So I think, Jeff, where I'd agree, there's certainly some hereditary factors. I think I lean really heavy. You mentioned one of those triggers being lifestyle. I lean really, really heavy on the importance of lifestyle.
Yeah. So Sam, would you say, so I want to wrap this up by asking you, Sam, since you're the guest here today, what is the first thing that you typically do or would suggest a client or a coach to do in one of these functional cases? And what is the last thing that you would suggest someone to reach for in a situation like this?
Start with the second question first. The last thing I would reach for is a one size fits all answer, because it seems like a faster approach for someone with complex issues, or taking something on a piece of paper as being like worth its weight in gold, that because this is spelled out for me and because this worked for one case, that this is going to work for every case. So the last thing I would do is that. I think you need to maintain an open mind and get to know your client, which brings me to what I would do first. I'm a big fan of having a streamlined onboarding and intake process and asking good follow-up questions. So
Yes.
your intake is the gateway to the coaching relationship, and also navigating expectations of the client, or that the client has of you as the coach, and also vice versa. So assuming that a coach already knew that, because I don't want to tell you something you already know, aside from using my intake process, I think the next thing I would do is follow-up questions and really getting a better understanding of their biofeedback and quality of life, through some open-ended questions, and really having a deeper understanding of their health history. Because I cannot tell you the amount of times that someone presents as what people call a functional case, or they think they need a protocol, and they go to apply a certain pre-made solution or kind of cookie cutter recipe versus doing something with a little bit more critical thinking. They're basically missing a key factor in their health history that would help unlock part of the case. So let's say an oversight, such as not understanding the person had a history of recurring UTIs or antibiotic use. That is an important detail, and getting to know that about your client would be a piece of information and a piece of data that would be very helpful when it comes to nutrition, supplementation, and even understanding the root cause of what might be going on for that human being. So I'd say my first thing, just because obviously a lot of coaches do onboarding, they do intake forms, I'm not going to state the obvious for you. I would say ask follow-up questions based on that, and knowing what to ask is huge. And you need to fill in the gaps on their health history before you jump to this kind of cookie cutter,
Yeah.
piece of paper approach with ordering 17 supplements because you think that that's what they need. You may need some of those, you may need a few of them, but don't do that until you actually do your due diligence. I like to do like a fly on the wall exercise. What would it be like to be, with that client for 24 hours of the day, getting
Yes.
to know them, understand them better,
That's really good.
and just really, you can even tell on a Zoom call, man. Like, you can have a call with someone and you can see their body language, how they breathe, how they talk
Oh,
about
yeah,
themselves, the
absolutely.
pace, the cadence of how they speak. These people, if you were to have a call, some people are pacing, like they're nervous, they're frantic, they're
Sometimes you can even
unsettled.
feel anxious energy through an email.
Oh, you can feel anxious energy through an email. You can
Mm.
feel, personality and attitude through an email. I would just say be observant and be willing to ask follow-up questions, and understand that asking questions before you provide an answer will lead to better coaching. And part of it is knowing the questions to ask. So
Absolutely.
that's a big part. I realize that seems very open-ended. I don't want it to seem amorphous. So I wanted to give a very concrete
Yeah.
example of like the health history, antibiotic use, UTIs, like very much red flag indicators of someone's past health and why they're struggling with what they're
Well,
struggling with.
that's
That'd be-
brilliant, and that loops back to what we were talking about before, of having a deeper understanding of the subjects and knowing
Correct.
how to ask those questions,
Yeah.
because the client usually isn't withholding information on purpose. They either forgot to tell you, or they don't think it's important,
Oh
or
yeah, 100%.
and it's up to to the coach to like you said, to kind of dig and get that stuff
Yeah.
A
that you
client
need
either
to know.
forgets or they just don't know that it's important because no one has ever told them that it's important. So
Mhm.
yeah, don't blame the client. Usually if they don't include it in an intake, they forgot, or they're busy with the week that's in front of them and the day that they're
Mhm.
living in their life and going to the grocery store and picking up their kids from school.
Yep, yep.
It has nothing to do with, you shouldn't take it personally as a coach. Sometimes clients leave stuff out and it's just forgetfulness, or they're not, it's like someone comes to you with biofeedback. They're complaining of brain fog, low energy, and short-term memory loss. And you're like upset at them that they forgot to include something on their intake form, which is the reason they hired you for coaching. So that's
Yeah,
my,
yeah.
uh,
That's a good, really good
like, give them
example.
a little bit of a break. I think you have to guide. Again, this is where the guidance comes in of, hey, this would be important for me because antibiotics have a very certain impact on your gut health and microbiome. Understanding if you have this past medication and repeat history, I'm kind of curious about antibiotic resistance, or maybe if you have any indication of, bacterial overgrowth or something like that, right?
Mhm.
That would be just a very basic exploratory exercise. But I like that you said that, Eric, is like, it's not necessarily deliberate on the part of the client.
Mm.
That's a really good point to end on here. And I'll just kind of reiterate that with an example where Eric and I were on an intake call recently. A new client had signed up, and this woman, she said, nobody's ever took the time to ask me these questions before. Everyone just
Yeah.
kind of just like looked at me as like a list of symptoms, and they gave me a list of solutions and a discount code. And
Mm.
I think that's one of the main problems in our industry, where nobody bothers to do this work, because this is a lot of work to dig into a client and construct that narrative. So, start to finish how they got to your desk. And it's challenging because a lot of people themselves, the clients themselves, don't want to reflect and do this deep work and maybe work with a therapist as well. So they demand a protocol. And then on the coaching side, it's a lot easier to just give them what they want and not do that work. And so the confluence of these two driving forces is why we have the problems that we have in the industry. It's on both sides, I think.
I agree.
Mm.
Yeah. So, anyways, this was a really, really good chat. Sam, where can people find you? What you got going on? Anything you want to throw out there for our listeners to contact you to get some help with?
Sure. So I am Sam Miller Science on just about every major platform, Instagram, podcast, all that good stuff. I do more of like a short solo episode format just to kind of give you a quick rundown on important topics in the industry, similar format on my Instagram and stuff as well. As far as really low cost, accessible resources, I typically will host like a free workshop, either quarterly or monthly. I have one coming up on the future of functional nutrition. Not sure exactly when this will air, but that'll be coming up in February. Other affordable resources would be something like my book, Metabolism Made Simple. So depending on your level of expertise, if you're more like an intermediate coach, that's a great resource to get started. If you're a little bit more advanced, you probably want to check out some of my stuff through Instagram, either samlerscience.com or even our metabolism school program, which Jeff mentioned during today's podcast. So lots of ways to potentially help you out. And I'd say arguably, I know there's a lot of free resources out there, but in terms of my personal page, as far as a hub for education, there's a lot of places to start in terms of my own content that's very low cost or no cost to you, because I think it's important that this information is out there. And if you need more support, like we talked about today, then I do offer that as well. So samlerscience.com, the book is Metabolism Made Simple. And you can also kind of branch off from any of my social pages. You'll find some of my other content as well.
Awesome. Well, hey, Sam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate
I
it.
hope our listeners get a lot out of this conversation. So, with that said, see ya.